Good morning. Am I a little loud? Yeah, maybe a couple notches, Joe. Thank you. And are we live on? Good morning, everybody joining on Facebook and YouTube. We welcome you also into the space. Good to be with you all this morning. And like to get into our conversation as soon as we can calm the heart and open the mind and prepare for it. So just take a moment to relax into your breath. Feel that grounding sensation through the feet and an opening of the heart space to encounter sacred space, which is your deepest nature. And make a commitment to yourself this morning that you will be willing to go beyond the norm of what you're accustomed to think and believe, to open yourself to the newness that will often come with this spiritual refreshing and uplifting that originates from the deepest nature. And as a necessary part of this work, we are willing to cut through or let go of anything that hinders, disrupts, or denies the truth of who we are, both individually and collectively, that we are offspring, that we are manifestations of divine light and love, experiencing ourself in form and awakening to what is truly formless. And so we put all into the hands of the great guru and guide, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, the one who works with us on the inner planes to bring us back into harmony and direct experience with the infinite light of all. And so it is. Amen. So we're going to jump into some of the teachings of Gnosticism. If you're familiar with Gnosticism, it's pretty much a catchword now that oftentimes refers to the Jewish and the Christian traditions that are based on this direct and immediate experience and the realization that spiritual awakening is a psychological act or a psychological event. And that gnosis is the Greek word for direct, immediate, and intuitive knowledge. And so the Gnostics had a very subtle understanding of the scriptural tradition coming out of the Jewish and the Christian worlds. And so we're going to look at a passage within the Gospel of Philip to get things started today. And as always, we want to listen as if we've never heard this before, even if we have. The Gospel of Philip is taken from the Nag Hammadi library. This was that cache of Gnostic scriptures that were found in 1945 in Egypt. And the interesting thing about the Gnostic tradition, as scholars have begun to really suss out, is that it was a burgeoning movement right at the same time as what we now have as the Orthodox and mainstream churches, so that there were dissenting voices from almost ground zero of the Jesus movement, that the Gnostics had said basically they're carrying on this deeper esoteric teaching that Jesus left his disciples, and that did not get put through or as clearly transmitted into the Orthodox mainstream churches. Oftentimes the mainstream churches were more bent on political machinations and maneuvers and trying to hedge their bets to see where the power structure would go, whereas the Gnostics were always on the fringe. They were outside of that competition. And we're going to see today how important that is for true transformation to take place. We're going to also be looking at the work of Walter Brueggemann. And Walter Brueggemann is a celebrated Old Testament scholar, one of the best in the game. And his approach to the Old Testament is, I consider, to be one of the best, because he sees the entire scriptural tradition, especially in the Old Testament, in his summary, as an interruption. He refers to the Bible in its true import as an interruption. An interruption of what? What we were just talking about, this idea of human beings basically creating an empire, a world system of government and institutions that serve that language of dominance and control. And the Bible is all about interrupting that hegemony. And so the Bible is very political. God in the Bible is very political in that sense, that God's judgment is a judgment that basically is saying reality needs to interrupt fantasy. Truth needs to interrupt illusion in order that we are not driving ourselves mad and driving the experience of human civilization off a cliff. Like if we don't navigate in alignment with reality, divine reality, then we are lost in the wilderness. And, we know the story of being lost in the wilderness. That also appears in the Torah. And it's only until the 5th book of Moses that we find out that the time that it would have taken the Israelites to travel from Egypt to the Promised Land was 11 days. And they were in the wilderness for 40 years. And the reason why it says they were in the wilderness, if you're reading between the lines, is because the older generation had to die away. The older generation was so rigid and solidified in its thought system that it couldn't enter the Promised Land, symbolically speaking. That thought of knowing that you think you know what everything is for is blocking the access or the progress into the Promised Land or the Kingdom of God or your spiritual awakening, whatever way you want to symbolize this. And so we're looking for a revolution, an interruption within the deepest part of our being where we are generating these ideas about who we are, what everything means, who other people are, because we live within this meaning matrix of our ideas and our thoughts. And what we're going to look at today is, in many cases, almost all across the board, that matrix of meaning has been given to us, imprinted upon us from when we were born. We grew up inside of a cultural appropriation to what we were to become. Our imagination, in a sense, has been co-opted to work within the confines of the known, the mainstream, and what is acceptable within the cultural belief system. And again, the Gnostics are outliers. Much like the shamans in ancient societies, they lived outside of the community. They were on the fringe between the community or the civilized part of life and the wasteland or the unknown. And so the shaman was an interface between the unknown and the civilization. And this is where we have to go if we want this kind of a renewal. We have to actually go into what the medieval Christian mystics called the cloud of unknowing. We have to actually be willing to divest ourselves of our own belief system, which was culturally appropriated upon us, and open up to the newness of the fact that we really don't know what anything is for or who we are. And so that kind of sets the stage of what the Gospel of Philip is about to tell us. Okay? So this is taken from June Singer's A Gnostic Book of Hours. So this is like a prayer book. If you're familiar with like the Anglican Church or the Catholic Church, they have books of hours that, at each stage of the day you have prayers, things to recite. Well, this is the Gnostic Book of Hours, so it's being drawn from the Gnostic scriptures, and this is the Compline, or the night prayer. So at evening, when everything is dark and quiet, this is what the Gnostic Book of Hours would recommend as the prayer and the reading. So the title of the Compline is Worldly Names Deceive. Gospel of Philip begins, names given to the worldly are deceptive. They divert our thoughts from what is correct to what is incorrect. Thus, one who hears the word God does not perceive what is correct, but perceives what is incorrect. So is it also with the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit and life and light and resurrection and the church and all the rest. People do not perceive what is correct, but they perceive what is incorrect, unless they have come to know through gnosis what is correct. The names which are heard in this world deceive. If they were in the eternal realm, they would at no time be used as names in the world, nor would they set among worldly things. They have their meaning in the eternal realm. So says the Gospel of Philip. And so what's being hinted at here is that underneath our internal chatter and our cultural communication is a vibrant, living, spiritual essence that is beyond name and beyond form. And as long as we're living a superficial and unexamined life, and we're staying locked within these patterns of belief and these this world vocabulary of surface ideas, we are not really encountering our own divine essence. Even if we come to church and we're saying the words and we're going through the motions, we're still lost in conceptual thought. And so what's being said here is also strongly echoed in A Course in Miracles in the workbook, where he basically says, nothing that I see means anything. These thoughts don't mean anything. Those are the opening workbook lessons. And the approach there is basically to get us off of the belief that we know what reality is. You know, in our Seth class we're taking, Seth is basically saying in the nature of personal reality, at least as you begin to examine your beliefs, say to yourself, these beliefs that I hold to be true and real may not necessarily be true. They might not necessarily be real. So as you're sitting here going through this process with us this morning, keep this in mind. Begin to recognize that your beliefs are at best symbols of reality. And like the Gospel of Philip was just saying, these symbols oftentimes are not correctly aligned with reality because the mind is staying within a superficial point of view. Okay? The other thing to think about as we get into the next step of our conversation is, again, in that Genesis account that we keep coming back to over the past couple of weeks, we know that Adam and Eve, symbolically speaking, again, reading this as a symbol, they were created in communication with reality. They were created in correspondence with the divine. When they took of that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, they lost that communication, and their mind became darkened, as it later says in the New Testament. And what's interesting is the first question gets asked in the Bible as soon as they have that encounter with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it says that God is walking through the garden, symbolically speaking, and he basically says to Adam and Eve, "Where are you?" Right? And this question, "Where are you?" is coming supposedly from the omniscient. So again, if this is a psychological journey from fragmentation to integration or from separation into wholeness, Adam and Eve, when they took that fruit, split their mind and lost communication and were no longer in that relationship with reality. And when you're not in relationship with reality, what do they classify you as? Psychotic, right? Insane. And so sometimes if you've maybe done this to your partner or your mother or your friend, and they're not making sense, and you say, "Where are you right now? Like, what are you talking about?" Like, I think that's the kind of question that was asked. Like, the mind of of humanity was lost at that point. So where are you is you're not making sense. You're babbling. And this idea becomes increasingly more flushed out as the story progresses, because what we get, bear with me, is a very deep mythos, a very eye-opening narrative begins to unfold if you're reading this text very subtly as it was meant to be read. We know that the serpent gave Adam and Eve the fruit. And what we're told through Jewish and Christian interpretations is that once they took that fruit, they were under the dominion of the serpent or the satanic belief system. Now, what is that? It is the ignoring of reality and making up your own version of good and bad for your own life. Basically writing your own script, your own story, as a separate part of life, no longer in touch with the totality. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because as the story progresses, human beings still want the totality, but they don't want the divine as part of it. So what starts to occur in this development is the notion of empire gets born. And so humanity begins to form these larger and larger groupings of government until there's this idea of empire, another totalizing event. But it's been totalized through this belief system where there is no God and you're only to serve the empire. You're only to serve the state. That's your role now. And so this is why the Bible is an interruption. The prophets that live on the fringe and are in communication with what is beyond the quotidian reality of human civilization and empire building are getting messages from reality to those who have ears to hear and eyes to see that this isn't the way life is supposed to be. Because when you begin to see the details of how this empire building gets put into action, women and children, orphans, widows, the disenfranchised, immigrants, they're all pushed aside. They're all ignored. They're stepped on and over and stolen from and subjugated and enslaved. So if you see this as just the way life is, then there's no interruption, and we have been in many ways co-opted by that belief system. And that belief system then has us going to sleep in the dream of our culture. Our culture is dreaming us. We're not alive. We're not awake. We're not aware. We are simply parroting back and repeating what the institutions of our culture have told us to think and say. Check it out. Do a little test on yourself. When somebody asks you what your political views are, find out if you're not just repeating talking points from your own siloed news channel. Check it out. Begin to examine your mind and your belief system to see, are you just really sleepwalking and parroting this control system? And so this idea of the interruption needs to take place. In fact, if I can digress, not really digress, but take it into a different expression, in Tibetan Buddhism, the highest school of Tibetan Buddhism is Dzogchen, the great perfection. And there is a two-stage practice in Dzogchen to break you out and into reality. And the first is Trekcho. And what Trekcho is basically you have to do this self-examination and break the rigidity and the hypnotic spell of the false belief system. It's called Trekcho, and it literally means cutting through. You basically cut through the illusions that you've been believing in. And when you cut through the illusions that you're believing in, your mind becomes open like space, and you begin to encounter the pristine awareness that is unconditioned and indestructible. Right? That's the great perfection. Now, what's amazing about this is that the next stage is Togal. And Togal means basically leaping over. And it's very interesting because in the Togal practice, once you clear the rigidity of your false thinking, it says that you can then begin to access this hidden light that's like a candle within a clay jar deep within yourself or your heart. And when you cut through the illusions that have been blocking you from your inner light, and you access that inner light, it says that inner light gets released and goes up a kati, or a crystal channel. And that crystal channel then goes out through your eyes, and you literally imagine, visualize an enlightened reality. You reimagine life. And stay with me on this. What's utterly fascinating, because remember, the great perfection is our original nature. It's who we've always been, always are. A Course in Miracles is saying that's exactly how we got into the world of samsara or duality or suffering, is that we misused the Togal, this visualization. We took the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and we projected our own imagination, our own separate state of reality. And as he says in A Course in Miracles, we began to collectively dream an insane world where God is absent, where the divine is absent, where there is no great perfection. And so what this interruption entails then is interrupting your current dream, breaking or dissolving the imagination that really was an imagination given to you by a limiting belief system, and having you reacquaint yourself, know again, gnosis, recognition, the light that you are, and then allow that light to emanate and redream or reimagine the world. And so on that note, this is Walter Brueggemann's classic book, The Prophetic Imagination. And Brueggemann is coming from a Christian point of view, so not always as non-dual as we're talking here, but his points are nevertheless as powerful. In his preface, there's something very important that I'd like to go over with you, because he mentions in passing this book that really kind of echoed his theories on imagination. And it's this book by William T. Kavanaugh, and it's called Torture and Eucharist, Theology, Politics, and the Body of Christ. And he says the book is an amazing critical reflection upon the role and conduct of the Catholic Church in Chile during the years of terror under Pinochet. Kavanaugh's analysis of the intentionality of Pinochet's torture and terror is that it was designed to make human community impossible, to eliminate any chance of human dissent or human alternative, and so to assure the absolutism of the state, right? Through terror, through torture, through mass murder. He then goes on, he says, in the final passages of his exposition, Kavanaugh reflects on the force of liturgic imagination by an appeal to the novel of Lawrence Thornton. Okay? So in other words, what the Catholic Church began to do before, they were asleep at the wheel in the beginning when Pinochet's murderous reign started to amp up. And then they got into practice, and remember, this is culturally specific. It was a highly Roman Catholic culture. And so one of the remedies that the church saw as helping people in this situation under Pinochet's reign of terror was to create this reimagining through the Eucharist, where you can then enter God's imagination. And as we're saying here, reimagine reality, and it has profound effects, as we're going to see in a moment, because it actualizes these deeper potentials within the human spirit. So Kavanaugh, who's writing about this terror in Chile, is referring to to another book, Imagining Argentina. And this is where it gets really interesting. So in Lawrence Thornton's book, Imagining Argentina, the key character, Carlos Rueda, is visited with a peculiar miraculous gift. What's this miraculous gift? The capacity to create futures by acts of anticipatory imagination. Now listen to this. This is a direct quote, or a summarization, of this character in the book. What is especially astonishing is that Carlos's gift is more than just the gift of seeing. His stories about people can actually alter reality. Men appear in the middle of the night to give back babies snatched with their mothers. Holes open in solid concrete walls, and tortured prisoners walk through to freedom. Carlos's imagination actually finds people who have disappeared. Confronted with evidence of the miraculous, Carlos's friends nevertheless remain skeptical, convinced that Carlos cannot confront tanks with stories, helicopters with mere imagination. They can only see the conflict in terms of fantasy versus reality. Carlos, on the other hand, rightly grasps that the contest is not between imagination and the real, but between two types of imagination. That of the generals in Pinochet's army of terror, and that of the opposers, or the opponents. Two types of imagination. The nightmare world of torture and disappearance of bodies is inseparable from the general's imagination of what Argentina and Argentinians are. Carlos realizes that he was being dreamed by General Guzman and the others, that he had been living inside their imagination. Are you grokking this? So in other words, you're either a part of somebody else's dream, or you wake up and you know you're the dreamer, and you take total responsibility, and you reimagine this world according to the light that you have in you as reality. Otherwise, we're playing in this shadow play of false imagination. So the interruption must come to each and every one of us to break us out of the dream of dreaming an empire that blocks out reality. Do you see how this is occurring in your own micro level? So then Brueggemann comments on this. So except to note that the need for Eucharistic imagination in the United States is very different from the need that it has in Argentina or Chile. Right? We're in a different culture, a different time. So those modes of expression and methods of reimagination wouldn't work for us. That's why we have to be flexible. So it's like we repurpose these myths and narratives and stories so that they can align with where we are now psychologically, spiritually, what is truly going to motivate us within our own cultural milieu. That's why A Course in Miracles is a very clear example of this, because it is literally the gospel of liberation reimagined with the utmost psychological sophistication and Freudian analysis. That is basically what's being said within the Course, is the reimagining from this liberated state. And we'll see that in just a few minutes. So Brueggemann goes on, he says basically we don't have the same symbol system as Argentina or Chile. So in 21st century America, indeed the difference is so great that one might judge there is no transfer of the power of imagination from one context to the other. Whereas the South American societies suffer torture and physical abuse, the cultural situation in the United States, satiated by consumer goods and propelled by electronic technology, is one of narcoticized insensibility to human reality. It may be, however, that torture and consumer satiation perform the same negative function. Empire is empire is empire. To deny, so this is the function, whether it's torture or satiation, whether it's Orwell's 1984 or Huxley's A Brave New World. To deny a lively communal imagination that resists a mindless humanity of despairing conformity. It is evident that in our American society, as in those brutal contexts, there are two types of imagination, that of the generals and their opponents, or that of consumer ideology and its resistors. The fact is that we in American society too easily live inside this imagination, right? Consumer identity. We're too easily co-opted by this. We're satiated, we're comfortable, we're insulated, we're narcoticized. Clearly, the fact is that we in American society too easily live inside this imagination when prophetic imagination is capable of enabling us to live inside God's imagination. So that's the interruption. Clearly, human transformative activity depends upon a transformed imagination. Numbness does not hurt like torture, but in a quite parallel way, numbness robs us of our capability for humanity. So that's why the self-examination that we have to do will oftentimes entail us looking at these parts of ourselves that are numb, that have checked out. Oftentimes, we are also doing this under the guise of spirituality. You know, spiritual materialism was a book written by Chogyam Trungpa back in the 1970s, a Tibetan Buddhist. And he saw back then how, again, consumerism co-opts sacred teaching. And sacred teaching just becomes another branch within the empire. It doesn't get out of the empire. It's not on the fringe of the empire. It acquiesces to the predatorial capitalism that we currently face in our society. And it doesn't liberate, it enslaves. It's about the me culture. So it's about my enlightenment, and I get to wear the robes, and I get to buy the bells, and I get to smell the incense, and oh, me, me, me. And this becomes this narcoticizing spirituality. Not to say incense and bells and robes and everything else are not to be employed in a useful and effective way. But the self-examination needs to go into what Jesus calls these shallow roots, these identities that we just assume to be who we are. We need to cut through those. The best way to start to cut through those, I've seen, is to relax a little bit. Because there are two parts of the mind right now. One is probably hot as hell because this air condition isn't working right. And the other part's completely at peace. But the idea is that there are two parts of the mind. One has been hypnotized by your life lived inside of American culture or wherever you grew up. And the other part of the mind is already on the fringe, wanting the life of the spirit to interrupt what this conditioned mind is endlessly repeating to itself. And so in order to open up, we actually have to relax, because a lot of us come in as the conditioned mind. And part of the conditioned mind is to be reactive. So whenever it's getting, whenever its belief system is getting interrupted, or it begins to feel as if it's being threatened by a different way of approach or a different reality, it doubles down. It keeps reinforcing itself, and it can do that through many ways: distraction, irritation, upset, fear, resistance, tension in the body, daydreaming, etc. So we want to be able to embody for a moment that calmer part of our mind and just relax and watch the cinema of that conditioned mind and its endless chattering. And so as we do this, we become less and less identified with that former imagination. We begin to see the dream differently. Thank you, Ray. You guys with me? Okay. So our final stop on our tour this morning is going to be in A Course in Miracles. It's a section called The Dreamer of the Dream. And as we're looking this morning, we see that there is a different narrative, a different imagination that can take hold. But again, as we've been learning in the Seth class, and I think rightly so, Seth points out the dynamics of imagination. And what he says is, imagination follows belief. Imagination and emotion, he says, follows belief. So whatever belief system you are embodying and choosing to be, that's the limit of what you're going to imagine for yourself and how you're going to feel. So just think, get them while they're young, co-opt the mind. So when we have been influenced and conditioned to believe a certain way within a certain culture, our imaginations get hijacked. And we begin to dream what the generals that we just read about want us to dream. Even when we think we're free, we don't realize this, but we're vulnerable to the prevailing zeitgeist or sign of the times or cultural overstructure that basically impinges upon our free will and choice with its higher agendas. And it moves us. Why did you buy the clothes you bought? Why do you watch the movies you watch? I mean, do you remember when you were a kid, you would see people on TV, I want to look like that. I want my hair to look like Johnny Depp's. Man, was that a long time ago. So, just look at how we've been influenced by friends and culture, and then what's right and what's noble and what's good and what's upstanding. And we go and fight these wars because we think we're on the side of the good. Don't get me started there. So this has all been part of a way of thinking or dreaming somebody else's dream. Not free. An effect within a world system that is causing you to think and believe what it wants you to think and believe. So the spiritual path is the interruption of that. It has to be. So this is Jesus in the Course, so poignant to what we're saying. No one can waken from a dream. The world is dreaming for him. What's the point? You can't waken from the dream if the general or the consumer mega corporations are dreaming it for you. He becomes a part of someone else's dream. He cannot choose to waken from a dream he did not make. Helpless he stands, a victim to a dream conceived and cherished by a separate mind. Could be Pinochet, it could be the World Economic Forum, it could be whatever. A separate dream is being imposed on you. There's no way out for you. You have to acquiesce. Just obey, shut up. Like even now, look at the way our First Amendment rights have been gutted since 2001. We have free speech zones that we can't even voice our discontent or our reimagining in ways that will directly confront power. We have in many ways become narcoticized by reality TV and sports, and then we think we're electing officials that are going to do that for us. And we elect these so-called progressives that stand for the orphan and the widow and the immigrant and the underserved and the marginalized. And when it really comes down to making legislative choices and changes, it's always for mega corporations, military industrial complex, and the billionaire donor class. But there's a lot of good performance art. There's a lot of powerful tweeting that gets done by the progressives. It's all fantasy. They've been co-opted. They're being imagined by the state. We can't depend on them. And that's actually divine blessing, because the pressure now is back on you. You can't scapegoat this. You can't viscerally live through somebody else changing it for you. You have to go in and cut through your own fantasy, your own false conditioning and imagining, and open to the light. Because, again, as he's saying, these separate minds that are dreaming you are careless indeed of you. This mind must be as thoughtless of your peace and happiness as is the weather or the time of day. It loves you not, but casts you as it will in any role that satisfies its dream. So little is your worth that you are but a dancing shadow leaping up and down according to a senseless plot conceived within somebody else's idle dreaming of the world. This is the only picture you can see, the one alternative that you can choose, the other possibility of cause, if you are not the dreamer of your dreams. So this is the interruption. This is the turning around. This is the cutting through. You're no longer at the effect level. When you wake up, you realize you've been projecting this. This is the fact that gets back to you are the Buddha. Mind is the Buddha. So again, relax for a moment, because we're hearing through either the calm mind that's interfacing with reality right now, and it's like, yes, or we're hearing through the filtering of our own conditioning that's been installed through the dream of another. So you are either the effect in somebody else's dream, you're just a little citizen in a great machine, and the best you can do is call your representatives, hope for the best at the next election. But does that ever pan out? Does the dream ever change? Walter Brueggemann says, go on YouTube and listen to some of his talks. He's a master storyteller of sussing out the Old Testament paradigm of God's justice versus the empire ideas within the human project of government. And he says that when you get into a totalizing system like a consumer culture like ours, it's never self-reflective. It never admits when it's wrong. It's always doubling down. It's always saying it's doing it when it's not doing it. It's empty and dry rhetoric. And if you're just a dupe that hasn't been duped enough to realize this, you will keep imagining what they're telling you to imagine. The only other alternative is that you take your power back. You divest your investment in perpetuating that dream that doesn't serve the underserved, the marginalized, the weak, those that can't help themselves. You take your power back from that. You no longer want to feed that culture of war and death. You have to do this one way or another, or acquiesce. And then you realize you're the dreamer. You're the dreamer of your dream. And he says, and this is what you choose. You're either dreaming the dream or someone's dreaming you, and this is what you choose if you deny the cause of suffering is in your mind. Right, so this is driving it home now. Be glad that the cause of suffering is in your mind, for thus are you the one decider of your destiny in time. So what we're doing here this morning is a deep examination of where we sit within the conditioning of our 21st century American culture. Have to look. You have to examine. You have to do insight practice to see what is constructing your reality and then causing you to imagine the world you're imagining. Your beliefs come before your imagination. If you have unexamined beliefs, you're imagining a world that enslaves you if those beliefs are not coming from reality. So this is what we're doing. We're cutting through those beliefs. And then we're recognizing, as we said earlier in the Tibetan teachings, that when we are not aligned with reality, we are projecting our own imprisonment. But it's coming from us, each one of us. The only reason why we can be enslaved by another person's dream and dominated by it is because we give the power to it. We say, okay. We literally vote for it. Again, the interruption is unsettling. When God interrupts, it's unsettling. In fact, Walter Brueggemann has another book entitled The Unsettling God. We want a nice, neat, and tidy picture, and we want God to kind of join in on our reality. No, it's reality on God's terms. And as long as people are being dominated and oppressed and subjugated and marginalized, that's not God's reality. And we should not support that. Didn't want to get any more political than that this morning. Okay. So back to the whole point to drive this home. Nobody out there has the power to do this to you. So this is not us throwing eggs and hatred and disparaging comments at any particular politician or group or government. No. It's recognizing social engineering and agendas, and if we are acquiescing to them, we will be taken in by them. Just that we're part of somebody else's game. They're playing a really hard and fast game. And if we're not examining our life and we're sleepwalking, we're just going to be sucked into that vortex. Have been already, if you look. So we're not casting blame on them. We're actually taking power back and responsibility for giving it away in the first place. That's why we're going to end with the beginning of this section in the course, the dreamer of the dream. He says, once you were unaware of what the cause of everything the world appeared to thrust upon you, uninvited and unasked, must really be. Of one thing you were sure, of all the many causes you perceived as bringing pain and suffering to you, your guilt was not among them. Nor did you in any way request these events and causes of your suffering. That's the way we believe, right? But the Course, again, is this major interruption and alternative narrative, the only alternative there is. Otherwise, we're in illusion. It's bringing you to reality, saying first and foremost, you're the Buddha. You're the Christ mind. You're dreaming this world. And the only way to change your dream is you have to change your belief about who you are. And what this world was doing in the first place was allowing you to give your darkness away. Of all the causes of your suffering that you've always encountered from the womb till now, you never thought it was my own guilt, this feeling of taking my own turn at that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I obliterated that from my mind. I don't remember that. That's deep in the unconscious. I acquiesced to empire. I acquiesced to the tyranny of the ego. I got what I wanted. But I don't like it now. It hurts. And I realize that I can actually heal it, but I have to also take responsibility. I chose it. This all came about by my free choice, and it must be ended by my free choice. So he says, otherwise, if we don't see it as our free choice and we are projecting it, we are in a forest of illusion. The one who makes illusions does not see herself as making them, and their reality does not depend on her. Whatever cause these illusions have is something quite apart from her, and what she sees is separate from her mind. She cannot doubt her dream's reality because she does not see the part she plays in making these illusions and making them seem real. So this is how we take our power back. We start accessing this deeper identity and its potentials because it's already in play. We're dreaming this dream. So it's this two-step process. Examine your mind and your belief system and find out where you're still harboring the controlling dreams of others and playing those out, which will always be within the ideas of conflict. Whenever you're dreaming an illusory dream, a false dream, it is always based in conflict. It's always based in us versus them. Why? Because the whole purpose of dreaming with the ego is to get rid of your guilt. Somebody else has got to carry it. So look at your targets, and your belief system has built within it the justifications for why you should hurl your darkness onto other people. They're wrong. But no, they're actually illusions within your dream that have allowed you seemingly to get rid of your darkness. But the darkness is within. You're projecting it. You're the dreamer. So this is where the idea of taking it back to the one who gave it and then allowing it to go into a place of relinquishment. I no longer want to do this to myself. And then, as you cut through, right, trekcho, you cut through, you get to the light. You start to feel your own inner radiance. And then that begins to have you see a different reality. You reimagine it. And watch what happens, like with Carlos Rueda in the story. You actually start to change the fabric of form and what appears in the world. Isn't this how all things come to be in form? Through imagination and will? So let's dream a different dream. Let's ask for the divine interruption and open to this possibility that we don't have to go into World War III or a global tyranny. Because if you're examining the dream of the generals right now, you're really looking at it and you're not siloed in their corporate-owned media narratives, you're seeing something real that they want to put on you. You have to take your power back. You have to ask for this interruption. That's about it, my friends. Blue bag's going to go around. All right. So how deep in the hole did I dig myself? Anybody want to yell at me? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I think, you asked such an important question, how do you approach this way of toggling between clear, penetrative insight and remaining at peace and stable and open to the moment in trust? And, that's basically the practice where you are, again, in a Buddhist context, you are calm abiding. You are in a place of relaxing and opening and just allowing yourself to rest in your pure nature, your awareness, the immediacy of the light and clarity of your own awareness. And you're using the power generated to see through false beliefs, right? They discorporate, they disintegrate. That's your function. The rest will come from deeper within you. And as you study sacred texts, that's why I say a lot of the time, Sunday morning is a long prelude to the Monday evening A Course in Miracles class. Get into a teaching, a practice that is internally consistent and all-inclusive as a lifestyle, and that you can trust is going to bring you to reality, and allow that belief system to invade, to come in, to open you up to deeper insight, deeper contemplation. So calm, still, releasing, shedding the old, and then repatterning with the new. Again, A Course in Miracles, the workbook lesson does that. The first part of the workbook is in 2 parts. Sheds, exfoliates the old ideas. The second part gives you a framework in which to perceive the present moment that aligns with the non-dual reality of eternity. So you have to do both. You have to get the blocks out of the way, and then you have to train the mind to think in the patterns that will bring you increasingly more into the divine radiance. So that's the short answer. Kemosabe. We bless this offering. We are grateful for the gifts as well as the givers. We ask that it be charged with the light of God and that it somehow take the form of divine interruptions in the world to break people out of the spell of enslavement and acquiescence and to open them to their true creative power. And so it is. Amen. If you're joining us on Facebook, you can donate on the links below, YouTube as well. We greatly appreciate you giving to the 8 a.m. service, so thank you very much. Anybody else have any last words? No? Please rise, my friends. We'll seal the deal. And as we just simply relax into this present moment, let us take the thoughts of Philip, the apostle, back into our hearts and realize that we can let go of the names and the beliefs and just enter into the pure embrace of God and His presence, her presence within the heart. Just relax and open to the divine kiss of the beloved. And in this intimate embrace, which is always here, always now, we know that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Go in peace, my friends. Thank you so much.